In the wake of September 11th, the Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, and his personal lawyer, David Addington, conspired with a number of top-level officials in the NSA and other agencies to change not only what they considered to be the legal restraints, but actually the culture of surveillance in the intelligence community. They moved from the exceptional surveillance to the surveillance of everyone. Technology has changed. Instead of sending people to follow you, we use the devices that you paid for, the services and the systems that surround you invisibly every day to watch you on our behalf. Metadata is the fact that a communication occurred.
So I called you.
You called me, when you called me, where you called me from. This information is the same thing that's produced when a private investigator follows you around all day. They can't sit close enough to you in every cafe to hear every word you're saying, but they can be close enough to know when you left your house, what the license plate of the car you were driving with, where you went, who you sat with, how long you were there, when you left, where you went after that. That's metadata.
Now, all of this metadata, it turns out, is actually remarkably easy to get at. In fact, you don't even have to hack the phone at all. All you need is technology that is readily available, called an IMSI catcher, that can intercept your phone's metadata remotely.
Every phone has what's called an IMSI, which is actually for the SIM card. That's your subscriber information, what your name is, what your phone number is. All of our devices, as they travel throughout the day, are constantly broadcasting in sort of this radio orchestra. IMSI catchers masquerade as the legitimate cell phone tower. So when you're saying, hey, cell phone tower, can you hear me? Instead, a man in the middle, somebody with an IMSI catcher in the trunk of their car, in a briefcase, in their office, has it send a louder signal back to you than the cell phone tower and say, I'm the cell phone tower.
Now this sounds pretty complex. How hard is it to make or buy an IMSI catcher?
It's incredibly easy. You buy these things off the shelf. Every police department in the United States seems to be buying these things nowadays. There's a joint CIA-NSA program called, appropriately enough, Shenanigans. Shenanigans was a project to mount on airplanes an IMSI catcher and fly it around the city. They can tell when you've traveled, they can tell when you move, and this all happens without warrants.
Right.
Shenanigans was happening in Yemen. That's where it was being tested. And you go, well, look, this is being used to aim missiles at terrorists. I'm okay with that. But these programs have a disturbing frequency, a tendency to move from war front to home front.
Right.
And within 6 months of Shenanigans being reported, the Wall Street Journal reported that the same technology was now being used domestically inside the United States. The FBI has a specific aviation unit that's flying around cities, and frequently they're monitoring protesters rather than violent criminals.
So you hacked his phone and you figured out who he called.
Right, and so I mean, what we've got here is I can see, you know, who he's calling and when he called them and how long the calls were. We can actually record his calls.
Wow.
So let's have a listen to them.
It was Urengi where we were 2 days ago, and I think someone pulled up in a tuk-tuk and there was a bomb on the tuk-tuk and it went off. And I think killed a doctor and maybe someone else. It was targeting the police there.
This will also keep a list of Ben's web browsing history.
Right.
And so, for instance, you can see here he's Google searching for BBC. You can see news articles that he's writing, checking his Twitter. It's sort of like reading someone's mind, because you can sort of see what they're thinking while they're on the internet. So we've been location tracking Ben. We can even get it to animate, and so it will show where Ben is at various sort of times. You can see him traveling around the city there. And you can tell exactly where he is, which is obviously, in terms of keeping tabs on someone, a highly desirable thing. Think about anything that the phone can do, right? Like once you've actually installed this malicious software on the phone, then it's simply a matter of activating the phone's capabilities. So I mean, the phone has a camera, right? Well, now we can turn on the camera.
What are these ambient recordings?
Yeah, so the ambient recording is kind of the invisible microphone, the real sort of spy stuff.
Like so many hours sometimes go for days also. Will get me hungry, thirsty, without water, without food.
So he's interviewing a Gitmo detainee, a former Gitmo detainee. So I guess when you talk about protecting journalists, protecting your source is a big issue.
Can you be said to be practicing journalism in a traditional sense if you can't guarantee source protection? You may be sort of actively endangering their livelihood, welfare, and life.
Now, this so-called golden age of technology has essentially made it possible for anyone to spy on anyone else. It begs the question, can people, for example, journalists, ever go dark? Is that even possible now with these new advancements?
How do we go black?
Well, so going black is a pretty big ask. For me, for example, I really know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But if the NSA wants to pop my box, they're totally going to do it. But if you know you're actively under threat, if you know your phone has been hacked, these are ways that you can ensure that your phone works for you rather than working for somebody else. You might have bought the phone, but whoever hacked it, they're the one who owns it.
That's because third parties can actually turn on your phone's microphones and cameras without you knowing it.
So you would turn this guy on, and you'll just heat that guy until the solder's molten. Because I'm going to be detaching the ribbon cables that are connecting the camera. As a surface mount device, you'll be able to just pull it off like that.
So this is the camera. What's that?
This is the other camera. You got two cameras on your phone. You got your front-facing camera for sort of the selfies, and you got your rear-facing camera. I think this one has a multi-microphone array, which is going to be this guy, and this guy.
But if you take out the microphones, then how do you use it as a phone?
You would add your own external microphone. For example, the iPod-type earbuds that have the mic integrated on the lanyard.
Is there a way you can tell if your phone's been hacked?
Perhaps the most terrifying thing is, if your phone had been hacked, you would never know.
Now, public anger hasn't been enough to end many of these programs. But increasingly, the question isn't whether or not they can be justified under law, but whether they're actually effective in the first place.
Recently, there were attacks in Paris. What happens when you have a terrorist attack like that within security agencies, the NSA, for example?
I was working at the NSA during the Boston Marathon bombings investigation. And as it was playing on the news, myself and colleagues were in the cafeteria, and we turned to each other and said, I'll bet you anything we already knew about these guys in the databases. And in Paris, I'm certain that the same conversation happened. And this is really the legacy of mass surveillance, is the fact that when you're watching everyone, you know who these individuals are. They're in the banks. You had the information you needed to stop, to prevent even the worst atrocities. But the problem is, when you cast the net too wide, when you're collecting everything, you understand nothing. We know for a fact that it is not effective for stopping terrorist attacks, and it never has been. The White House appointed 2 independent commissions in the wake of my disclosures in 2013 to review mass surveillance programs and go, all right, do these have value? Should they be changed? Should they be reformed? They looked at the evidence, the classified evidence, and they found, wow, despite the fact that this had been going on since 2001, it had never stopped a single terrorist attack in the United States. And that's after monitoring the phone calls of everyone in the country.
So that's a huge point. So 2 independent commissions started by the White House said mass surveillance has not stopped a terrorist attack.
And both of them found that these programs should be ended. And then they came up with 42 different points for reform that they recommended should happen to restrict the use of these powers. The last time that I saw a review of this, the president only adopted 3 of the 42 points.
Why?
Because they would limit the exercise of executive power. This is something that you have to understand is not about this president. It's about the presidency. It's clear that the public opposes a majority of these policies. And yet politicians, because the word terrorism is involved, they can't justify being the one to stand up and mount the vote because they know there will be another terrorist attack.
Because if they say no, we're gonna stop doing this, and then there's a terrorist attack, they get painted with that brush.
They know they'll be blamed by their political opponents, and they're right. Of course their political opponents will do this. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. And unfortunately, it's quite effective because we live in a time where the politics of fear are the most persuasive thing on the table.
Now, while the debate over surveillance continues to rage here in the US, Edward Snowden remains a fugitive for his revelations about the NSA, and he had a cautionary statement about what's at stake.
When the world was first introduced to you, you made a statement about turnkey tyranny. What did you mean by that?
It means that even if you trust the government today, what happens when it changes? And in our democracy, we're never more than 8 years away from a total change of government. Suddenly, everybody is vulnerable to this individual, and the systems are already in place. What happens tomorrow, in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, when eventually we get an individual who says, you know what? Let's flip that switch and use the absolute full extent of our technical capabilities to ensure the political stability of this new administration. When we think about the future and where we go from here, the question is, are we going to change and enter sort of a quantified world where everywhere you've been, everyone you talk to, it's indexed, it's analyzed, it's stored, and it's used maybe against you?
Within our technologies here, we have our license plate reader system, which can capture dozens of license plates in a matter of a second.
Or will we recognize the danger of that and embrace the fact that people should have space to make mistakes without judgment, to have sort of the unconsidered thought or conversation with your friend? But if that was recorded in a database where, you know, now you say, I think Donald Trump should be kicked off a cliff, and Donald Trump becomes president someday, and everybody who said that ends up getting thrown off a cliff. That's a very dangerous world. And I think this really is the question that our political structures are not yet comfortable even discussing. But whether they like it or not, it's a world that's coming, and we're going to have to confront.